According to a recent report from the Western Electricity Coordinating Council, the demand for electricity is projected to grow by 20% in the next 10 years. This same report 2 years ago had growth at 10%. So that's how fast the world is changing. To address the need for an increased supply of affordable and reliable energy options, Governor Gianforte created an energy task force. He asked Department of Environmental Quality Director Sonia Nowakowski to lead this task force. We are honored to have Director Nowakowski here today to lead a discussion with task force members on demand, supply, and markets, where we are today and where will we be in 10 years. Please welcome Director Nowakowski, John Chesser, Quantica Infrastructure CEO, Ed Ryan, President and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway Energy Montana, John Hines, Vice President of Northwestern Energy, and Mark Lambrecht, CEO of the Montana Electric Cooperatives Association.
Thank you for the fine introduction, Nancy. I really appreciate it. As Nancy pointed out, Governor Gianforte in September launched an energy task force to provide recommendations and strategies for Montana to unleash American-made energy. The governor noted the state's all-of-the-above approach to energy, which has diversified Montana's energy resources and also increased its abundant energy potential to support the expansion of energy production in every sector and to avoid market distortions by not picking winners or losers in the marketplace. That task force met for the first time on September 22nd, and I'm honored to be serving as its chair. I'm also honored today to be joined on the stage by several task force members. This task force is convening leaders in Montana's energy sector, and we're asking them to identify barriers and to develop a strategy to deliver affordable, dependable energy for Montana families and the businesses that are ready to invest in our state. It's also building on Montana's energy legacy with innovation and investment in Montana resources. I think we all know it is essential to remember some of our top objectives, and that's obviously to increase the supply of affordable and reliable energy options for Montana, and again, to develop strategies that address our current needs, but also ensure sustainability for future generations. The task force represents a unique blend of perspectives and expertise. And I think this approach allows us to leverage diverse viewpoints for more comprehensive solutions, to ensure that our recommendations are balanced and considerate of all Montanans, and to promote unity and a shared commitment to our state's energy goals. So President Trump has declared a national energy emergency, citing inadequate supply and infrastructure leading to higher prices. Leaders like Interior Secretary Burgum and Energy Secretary Wright are working around the clock to address this energy crisis. And Montana is delighted to work with these federal partners, and we are ready to do our part to bring more energy generation online and to help make America affordable again, as the governor has said. Montana will be a leader in moving energy policy in this country forward. And to that end, I'm going to send it over to this outstanding panel. We are joined by Mark and John Chesser, who are both members of a growing demand work group that we formed. And then we have Ed, I think you serve on the generation work group. And Mr. Hines, Northwestern Energy is currently on the markets and transmission work group, but we also recognize that you probably could be involved in any one of the three work groups and have quite a bit to say about it. So I want to get started, and I'll start down at the end with Mark, but let everybody take a chance. I want to know what you or your business or organization will bring to the Energy Task Force and what success will look like to you when we report our actionable items out to the governor a year from now.
Thank you, Sonia. And morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and a real honor. And Governor, First Lady, and Congressman Westerman, good to see you again. So just a little bit about the electric cooperatives. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with Northwestern Energy, MDU, the investor-owned utilities. Electric cooperatives are owned and governed by their members, and we provide distribute electricity through about 40% of Montana, about 400,000 consumer owners of our electric cooperatives. And the association that I direct includes the 25 electric cooperatives operating in the state of Montana. So we have a lot of stake in the game here. And so what we bring that's unique is a geographic distribution across the state of Montana that is rural as well as urban. We provide electricity in places like Macomb County, Prairie County, all across the state of Montana and its vast rural areas, but also in Billings, Yellowstone Valley Electric Cooperative, Missoula Electric Cooperative, and of course Flathead Electric Cooperative in those more urban areas. So that diversity requires a diversity in our approach to energy supply and all of the other aspects associated with that. And so I'm going to be bringing that perspective to our discussions on the Energy Task Force, and I'm very grateful to the governor for including us in that panel. Was really pleased that we had a really robust conversation the other day on our growing demand panel, and I think we've identified some of the primary problems. We'll get into that a little bit later, and we actually seeped over into some of the possible solutions. I know we weren't supposed to do that yet, but we couldn't resist, and so really looking forward to that and sharing our perspective. So success for us, I wanted to mention, is going to be how do we continue to maintain safe, affordable, reliable electricity for our members. And it's not just our residential members. You know, we also provide electricity to businesses, farms, ranches, industry. How do we maintain their competitiveness in this environment? So if we can have actionable items that the governor and the legislature and investors can consider to maintain that resource adequacy at an affordable rate, that will be success to us.
I'd like to also welcome my thanks to the Chamber and the Governor, First Lady for hosting this event. It's an incredible opportunity for people who want to have Montana continue to become even a greater state to work together and come up with ideas on how we can continue to push that objective forward. Regarding the task force, there's a really simple thing that we at Northwestern talk about, and it's if Montana does well, we as a company do well. And so we really would like to see identifiable objectives coming out of the task force that something that we know we can implement as a state to help further affordable and reliable electricity like Mark just mentioned. That's the linchpin for us to be able to keep our businesses alive and also to bring new businesses, new employees into the state. And not only that, you know, one of the big issues we have in Montana right now, the legislature and the governor addressed the property tax component for the residential customers, but industry also needs some of that offset. Now, one of the easiest ways to do that is to bring in a bigger tax base. And so hopefully these sort of gatherings, the task force itself, Sonia, will be able to further the ability to develop new business in the state through affordable and reliable electricity. Now, specifically on the task force, I would say that, you know, there's two pieces to the puzzle, obviously. There's the transmission piece and there's the supply piece. And you can't really develop one without the other, I don't believe. We certainly want to be able to take advantage of the markets that are outside of Montana when it makes sense for our customers, but we also want to be able to export power when it makes sense for us as a system and as a state. And we're very much constrained on both those areas right now. So anything that can come out of the committee that facilitates that will be really helpful.
Great, thank you, Sonia. First off, it's a real privilege just to have the opportunity to participate in the task force. So thank you, Governor. Thank you, Sonia. At Berkshire, you know, so I have 3 of Berkshire Hathaway Energy's companies, but Berkshire Hathaway Energy broadly operates in 28 states and 1 Canadian province. We own and operate natural gas pipelines, natural gas power generation, coal power generation, renewable energy. So I'm hoping that I can bring some of the perspective from some of those other jurisdictions of what policy has been successful, what policies frankly haven't been successful, and bring that into the task force. But I will just, I won't go on in this first opening salvo, but I'll just say that I think Montana is uniquely positioned compared to other jurisdictions here in terms of potential.
Sure. Well, first off, Governor, thank you for inviting us to be here and forming the task force. Thank you, First Lady, for your continued support of everything we're doing here. And thanks, everyone, for making time on a Thursday to be here. So we started Quantica to basically help new markets get created for data center customers. And for that, they need three things. They need land that's suitable for their data centers, and they need the power generation to be built for those data centers, and they need telecommunications so that a data center in Montana can talk to a data center in Washington or in Illinois. And so those are the three things that we do as an infrastructure company as we make those new markets ready for those customers. My experience has been around all sorts of power generation. So operated a 3 gigawatt wind and solar fleet that got sold to Brookfield, and then ultimately was CFO of a 15 gigawatt operator of thermal assets, including a nuclear power plant. And the relevant experience for this state in this room was it was in the middle of Pennsylvania, and you had $16 power price with a $22 nuke. And we had to visit that nuke and constantly talk about the risk of that asset shutting down. And so we developed a data center, 475 megawatts for a big hyperscaler, and there's now 20-year contracts for that nuke to supply power to that data center. And so those workers no longer worry about their job, their plant shutting down, and that hyperscaler is investing billions of dollars in the community, creating hundreds of jobs that will likewise be there for a long time. I think the success of this task force is going to be, do we deliver a roadmap, or actually not do we, we will deliver a roadmap to the governor and the legislature and all the stakeholders in the state of how do you bring those opportunities in Montana, and by giving that roadmap to the state, we'll give customers and investors confidence that Montana can deliver this roadmap of transmission, power generation, real estate, telecommunications, and that the state's ready for that. And then that will allow us to go create jobs for people for the next 20 plus years.
Well, thank you for those answers, and I look forward to working with you. Before I move on, I think we're joined today by many task force members, and so I was just hoping task force members in the audience, if you could just stand up and a quick round of applause, and thank you for your participation in that task force. Well, thank you. And so turning it back to the panel, I want to focus on Ed and Mr. Chesser here. And put you guys on the spot. So how has energy demand and supply shifted in the last 10 years from your vantage point? And what does that mean to Montana?
Sure. Well, I'll break that down into the two components. Let's talk about the demand side. The last 10 years, we've all seen it. Demand was typically growing about 0.5% a year because the country was deindustrializing, the country was outsourcing, and people were still driving combustion engine vehicles. So you had little to no demand growth. And then the result was on the supply side was you just, everything was maintenance. So if you had a coal plant or a gas plant that aged out, you would shut it down and you'd replace it with wind, solar, and battery storage. But there was really no reason to invest in the system. And the net result was you've got, you don't have a lot of excess capacity, and you've got an aging infrastructure system, as John Hines talked about, where I've seen that 31% of the transmission in the country is beyond its useful life, and 46% of the local distribution is beyond its useful life. It's being maintained 1 year at a time. Looking to what's happening the next 10 years is that you've got demand growth going to 2.5% a year, and that's being driven not just by data centers, but also by adoption of EV, which requires electricity, not gasoline, and also the reindustrialization of the country, including advanced manufacturing, including the factory that's being opened in Lewistown, Montana, which is a nice win for the state. But that's an example of things that require more power. So that 2.5% demand is all hitting, but the supply is not necessarily there, as you'll hear in this audience over and over again. It takes time to build generation. It takes time to build transmission and all the distribution. But since the demand is there, it can be done.
Yeah, listen, I wish I was in my 20s and not in my 50s, because for decades, the electricity industry was largely flat and stagnant in the U.S., right? As manufacturing left the U.S., population growth was not enough to make up for that lost electricity demand. But things are changing, right? So we're seeing onshoring of manufacturing. We're seeing data centers. We're seeing electricity growth that is actually exceeding GDP forecasts, and we're seeing a much more dynamic supply generation mix. So, I'll have, the opportunity to participate maybe, a few more years in this, past this inflection point. But like I said, I wish I was a 20-year-old engineer again and had another 35 years ahead of me.
Well, I'm going to keep Ed on the hot seat here, but for Ed and Mr. Hines, Montana has historically been a strong energy exporter. And do you see Montana continuing to be an energy exporter? John, do you want to start?
Sure. We've been a strong energy exporter for two reasons. One, we have some very large federal dams in northwest Montana that are, by federal law, intended to serve the western Montana portion of the co-op community, and prioritized if they don't consume all of that, which they can't because of the size of the resources, then they have to go to the western part of the United States to serve those co-ops. So it's always been an export there, but it really hasn't been devoted to a good portion of Montanans. The second piece is that we had quite a bit of generation at Colstrip units 1 and 2, and we also had a Corette plant in Billings. That summed up for about 900 megawatts of capacity. All four of those really aren't available to Montana, and what are we replacing them with in general? We're replacing them with intermittent generation. There's nothing wrong with intermittent generation, but it's having that serve as the backbone without storage does cause a fundamental problem for Montana. We have some significant obstacles that we need to be able to address in Montana in order to successfully move forward with new generation. And I can give you, unfortunately, a real live example of what we've experienced. We have a 175 megawatt gas plant in Laurel, Montana, just outside of Laurel. It's located adjacent, maybe within 150 yards of a large chemical plant. We thought it would be a perfect place to site a gas generation. It's located next to an abandoned oil pipeline that we were able to retrofit and send gasoline to it, or natural gas to it. The litigation surrounding that resource caused actually a suspension in the construction of it. We estimate it cost our customers ultimately around $20 million for that litigation piece to basically get reconciled, and it still isn't. As Sonia, as you know, you're still working through a couple of the remands from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has created a new standard under the Constitution that Montanans should be afforded a stable environment. I Googled that and did ChatGPT on it. There is no definition anywhere in the country on what a stable environment is from a legal perspective. Does that mean? That just means attorneys are going to make quite a bit of money over the next 5-10 years defining that, unless we can somehow redress that. So in order for us to be a dominant player both in the state and outside of the state, I think we need to somehow address some of the regulatory/legal issues, because I firmly believe, and our portfolio, I think, exemplifies it. It's an all-of-the-above approach. We can't focus on just one type of generation resource. All of them make sense in particular niches. Hopefully, storage will become even a better product than it is now from an affordability perspective. I know Ed has recently completed a storage project, which is great, but we still have difficulty looking at it from a cost effectiveness perspective for our customers at least. And so we have to rely on basically the wind, solar, thermal, coal, and hydro, which makes up our portfolio. And for us to expand, it's going to be very difficult until we can get those issues addressed in order to be a net exporter again.
Yeah, my advice to policymakers is don't oversimplify the opportunity and say I'm going to be just an exporter or just an importer. I think those days are behind us. If you look at of the 28 states that we operate in the one province, if you look at the jurisdictions that have the lowest cost of electricity and the highest reliability of their power grid, they're states that are highly interconnected with their neighbors, and they're both importing when they have deficits, and they're exporting when they have supply surpluses. And it's that opportunity to take advantage of that diversity, and whether it's time of day, whether it's generation mix, whether it's load mix. And this is where I think Montana has such a significant advantage over many other states. Montana sits geographically in the middle of multiple electricity markets. You have several markets to the west of Montana, you have 2 markets to the east of Montana, and you have 1 market to the north of Montana. And if we can continue to build out the infrastructure, there is both the opportunity to do additional generation, but also bring on additional load customers into the state. And when you sit at the intersection of multiple markets, good things happen.
Well, I want to build on that a little bit and follow up. So we talked about that kind of exporting idea. How do you see Montana's position in the region shifting? And what are the resources in the state that are increasingly being called upon or in demand across the region? If you two want to answer.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. Listen, Montana is, you heard me say this before, is a great place to do business. John mentioned we're finishing up an energy storage project. It's going through commissioning right now. It'll be commercial here in December. We've done that project in 30 months from idea to commercial operation. Now, 30 months for those who aren't in the electricity industry may feel like a long time. I will tell you that is lightning speed in the electricity industry. And I can say this with confidence across the 28 states that we operate in, that's the fastest we've ever done it. And we've done it here in Montana. So listen, we can realize these opportunities in the state. I do think transmission will get built. I think some of that will be built by Northwestern, some of that will be built by other market participants, some of it will be built in partnership. I think there's the opportunity to build some of that infrastructure in the wholesale electricity market so that Montana ratepayers aren't paying for all of it. I would say the one challenge that we've run into in Montana is we need more natural gas. We got to find a way to bring more natural gas into the state, and I know that that's something that the task force is working on.
I guess Ed made a point a little bit ago about the ability to use external markets to basically help our customers. And I absolutely agree with that, and it's critical. And as I noted, we are constrained on a supply perspective. We're also constrained on a capacity perspective, especially the way we have to price transmission, where the cost for intermittent generation like wind and solar on the transmission system, in order to reserve their spot on the transmission line, it doesn't reflect it over reflects the cost of moving that power just because it's not available as much of the time. And so you need more capacity basically if you're going to have that be your business driver, an intermittent resource piece, or storage, one of the two. I look at it a little bit different lens, though, is what other states are beginning to need. And it's not wind, blue, black colored generation, no matter how your perspective is on it. What they're looking for more now is reliable capacity type of generation. That's what is in a shortfall in the West especially, but also in the SPP market where we do, which is a huge market from Canada down to Texas. All of that, what people are building into that is intermittent generation, and the amount of reliable generation vis-a-vis the intermittent is continuing to shrink, and so that's why you're having some reliability issues there. Bottom line is they want generation that they can count on. That's the easiest way that I think of it, and I think to explain. And we as a state need to focus on that in order to further our economic development, but also have a valuable product outside of the state as well.
Great, thank you. Mark, I want to build on kind of your introduction and when you talked about your customers. So, and put you in their shoes a little bit. What do your customers mean when they say they want affordable energy? And how does that translate to rates that your co-op boards are setting?
Well, previously I talked about our geographic diversity with electric co-ops in Montana. We also have economic diversity. About 12% of our members statewide live at or below the poverty level. It's even more of an acute problem on the 6 Indian reservations that we serve, where between 20 and 38% of our members live at or below the poverty level. So our directors of our co-ops are significantly aware of the challenges that people living at the margin have in paying their power bill, acquiring food security, transportation, heat for their homes. I mean, all of those considerations are at the top of their mind. And so their priority is to try to limit the amount of stress people have in having to pay their power bill. That's really what affordability means from that perspective. But I touched on it earlier as well. Affordability is critical for the farms and ranches and businesses and industries that need to remain competitive. So how do we address that affordability when you have the constant pressure of rising power supply rates or increases in equipment? When you consider the astronomical costs for transformers or bucket trucks or power poles, all of those things which continue to go up and we have no control over. So what our boards do is every time they meet to set rates is they have to set them as low as possible to maintain that affordability, but also the reliability and the safety of the system. That's the sweet spot that they've got to hit. It's a really tough responsibility for those elected directors to have to hit that mark. But I congratulate them on doing it. But they've all made some really tough decisions over the last several months. We've had rate increases in eastern Montana, and we're having rate increases in western Montana. And so what I'm really looking forward to as a member of this task force is trying to identify some ways that we can relieve that pressure. And I think in our conversation the other day, I think we've come up with some really good ideas already on how do we build new baseload generation, how do we build new transmission, all of those aspects that will provide predictability to our directors going forward. And that's the key. We know costs are going to go up, but the unpredictable environment is what drives our directors crazy. They've got to know, long time in the future, what are those steps going to be, and how do we plan to address them?
So to build on that, what are customer-owned utilities across the West doing to limit the impacts to their members while also attracting large manufacturing like data centers? So what I'm getting at is, are there lessons to be learned from Public Power for Montana?
There sure are. I can say 6 of our members in western Montana have recently joined PNGC Power. It's a generation and transmission company or cooperative that is helping them procure additional energy resources. John touched on the hydro resources through the Bonneville Power Administration that are directed toward public power and electric cooperatives. The demand is increasing so much that it's no longer enough. And so they're looking for supplemental power and are finding some innovative ways to acquire that through their partnership with PNGC. Same thing's happening in central to eastern Montana with Basin Electric Power Cooperative, which is building new generation. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, they did ribbon cutting on a new gas plant, and I know they're working on a large load strategy to deal with data centers and other large industrial customers. I'm on my way to Bismarck after this meeting to learn more about that. I know just from a cursory review, there's going to be some real innovation there that I think we can bring those lessons back in to our task force and hopefully into Montana.
Great. Well, sticking with customers and affordability and perspectives there, John Hines, I'll put you on the spot. Other than litigation, which is near and maybe not so dear to my heart, what have been the major cost drivers of rate increases?
Well, I'm going to say thank you, Sonia, for that. First, give just a little bit of a background. We've invested over, just say, the last 10 years around $3.7 billion to increase our reliability in our infrastructure. That means distribution and transmission. It also includes, we've bought 900 megawatts now of Colstrip power. We bought 450 megawatts of hydro. We've bought a wind plant. We've built 325 megawatts of gas plant. And our rates are below the inflation rate. The past 10 years, I think inflation using the CPI is around 34%. You look at, the government puts out a statistic on what's the average electric rate across the country. We've been below that every year. So have our rates increased? Absolutely, but we have done a really good job, I believe, in making the balance that Mark just mentioned. We have to have investment in our system in order to maintain reliability. We also, I believe strongly, had to invest in our supply side in order to remove the risk to our customers from reliance on market. We couldn't sustain, in fact, you saw large industries shutting down when there was reliance totally on markets at certain times. When the markets are low, it's a great thing, but when markets blow out, it's exceedingly painful, also oftentimes leading to shutdowns. So we made a conscious decision to basically bring back a full supply portfolio to our customers that is now owned and under our control. So that's kind of the basic of what's driving some of our increases. I would argue that also we do need to address, I mentioned it already, property taxes in the state for large customers like ourselves. I think of the property tax assessment to Northwestern as kind of a hidden tax by the legislature, frankly. They can put that on us, we pass it on to our customers through the bill. The bills are elevated because of it, and we get blamed for it as opposed to what the legislature is trying to fund. And just to give you a reference point, South Dakota, which we serve as well, our bills are about the same in Montana and South Dakota. For an average residential customer, it's around $112 per month. In the South Dakota, that's about 2.5% of their bill is property tax. In Montana, it's around 13%. And that elevates our bills compared to other parties. And anytime we're trying to entice business into our state, that also influences their decision. So I think all three of those are probably the principal drivers. One of them, I think we can take, and we commit to working with the legislature as this upcoming session to see if we can't find some solutions that moderate it. I'll go back to a point I made earlier, though. The more we can bring business into this state, the more that can be spread across more customers, which means it dilutes the impact on each and every one of us.
Well, John Chesser, I also want to ask you then, how does energy cost factor into development decisions for data centers?
Great question, Sonia. Energy is the number one cost of operating the data center, not the investment in the servers that get put into the building, but the operation of the data center. The number one cost is power. It's 60%, give or take a little bit, in most buildings, and it's the single biggest driver. And when they look at sites, they say, well, do I want to be in South Dakota, North Dakota, Utah, Montana, Wyoming, it's all a relative cost. It's where's the power affordable? So I think it's a huge driver in that. Now, beyond that, if you have cheap power that's not reliable, if you have cheap power that's not always there, then that doesn't work. And so there's a constant struggle between I need power that's affordable, but it's also reliable as well. And that's what you're seeing now with all the demand growth is the opportunity to go give people reliable power that if you've got the industrial customers that show up, it can also be affordable.
Well, I want everybody to take a crack at this one, and we'll let Ed start, and then you guys can go in whatever order you like. But what are the barriers or challenges in Montana facing the development of new generation or new load growth?
I think it's just infrastructure, right? But there's opportunities to address that issue. I talked about natural gas. We need some natural gas pipelines, and I'll piggyback a little bit off of the previous question too. But data centers. There's different opinions in the industry. Some folks see them as this wonderful opportunity. Others characterize them as the boogeyman. What I'd say is if it can be done properly with a no harm to customer principle, it can be a fantastic opportunity. Imagine we need a new natural gas pipeline into Montana, and there's a data center who wants to contract for a gigawatt of power, right? That's more than half of the peak capacity of the Montana electrical system. That data center might become the anchor customer that allows that infrastructure to get built that then Montana broadly can benefit from. So there's an opportunity here to build transmission on the wholesale electricity market, and then I think we need to try to find some opportunities to also drive some natural gas infrastructure.
Completely agree with Ed. Just a different perspective that we discussed on our task force call the other day, something that was new to me, but it's a perception issue. We talked about the news stories, that Montana is no place where you can come do business. We've got to fix that. And, investors around the country are reading about our litigation environment. They're reading about some of the issues that we have with legislation and, Montana's not open for business. We've got to turn that around 180 degrees. How we do that, we'll have further conversations about that. But the other aspect that we talked about was an education component, and we'll bring this for your consideration, Governor. When we talk with members and consumers throughout the state of Montana, there's a real lack of understanding about the importance of baseload electricity generation in Montana. Most people don't know where their power comes from, how the whole system works, how it contributes to reliability and affordability. And so if we can do something to help educate Montanans about the importance of that, perhaps we'll have better success on attracting new investment in Montana, limiting the lawsuits that drive the headlines around the country that scare investors away. So those are a couple of things that I'm hopeful that we'll be able to work on together.
One of the benefits of going last is that I can say I agree with everybody. So I'll just emphasize a couple of the points. From our perspective, we really do see we're at a tipping point to be able to do much more investment, especially on the supply side, without the infrastructure necessary to do it. We're working on some kind of novel ways to bring more gas in, but fundamentally, we're going to need more pipe. And, that's just a reality. And there's a lot of gas that is being flared just to the east of us. It'd be really nice to just take that and bring it into Montana and be able to produce some generation on that. We also have tried to serve some customers in Montana, some of Mark's folks even, but we have a difficulty because of transmission being able to get power to them. So it's constrained that way. We have what I call an economic advantage right now. We have around 370 megawatts of generation at Colstrip that is not in our rate base and is available to help what I think is kind of jumpstart some of this growth that we've been talking about. But that, with the size of some of these large loads that we're talking about, that's going to be consumed fairly quickly. And so we need to be able to quickly move to that infrastructure development and able to meet their needs.
And I agree with everything John Hines just said. I'll echo what Mark said. I opened up saying that this roadmap is critically important for the governor and the legislature, but it's also important for people outside the state. The headlines about the state are about Supreme Court cases, letters back and forth about state agencies, and yet everyone in this room knows that if you want to get something done in the state of Montana, it can be done. There's a process, you have to get input from stakeholders. If you're going to try to ignore someone and sideline them, they're going to slow you down until you address their issues. But if you're willing to engage with the people in the state and explain to them about the job creation, the property tax creation, creating generations that the lights will always stay on in winter, people are going to end up supporting what we're trying to do here. And so dispelling those perceptions is a big part of this roadmap by saying the state has these issues, well, these perceptions, all these perceptions are going to be fixed over the coming years by addressing stakeholder issues up front. So.
Well, I want to kind of bring it back to now to talk more about the task force and some of the work. The Growing Demand Group met on Tuesday to work on their problem statement. Generation and Markets and Transmission met a week ago. And we had some really good conversations about problem statements and identifying barriers and then prioritizing those barriers. So Mark and John Chesser, I'll put you a little bit here on the spot to talk about some of the points that were shared in the Growing Demand Work Group on Tuesday, and if there are themes that you're starting to see already develop for a problem statement.
Okay. I think the perception issue came up as something that a more public stance from all the business community and other members in government on that Montana is open for business, and giving that other view is helpful. The opportunities around transmission are real, but the fact is that there hasn't been despite what John said, billions of dollars investment over 10 years, the size of the prize that Montana has now is in excess of that. The amount of investment that could come into the state if we're successful at getting compute customers to locate here is greater than anything Northwestern's done the past 10 years. And so all those things just mean that the state is going to have to permit things it may not have seen before in terms of scale, bigger plants, bigger transmission lines, and all those upgrades. So I think just permitting process, perceptions, Montana sitting at the intersection of multiple markets. Does Montana need to join one of those organized markets? And what are the pros and cons of that?
I guess what I would add to that, there was a lot of talk about stranded assets in our call. There was investors looking to build new transmission, new generation in Montana. They're concerned that, how far down the road do you go with that investment, and there's litigation or some other factor that leaves you holding the bag. So, we're talking about certainty. What are we going to do administratively, legislatively, to try to acquire that certainty for investors? So that's one of the problems we talked about. Briefly mentioned the news stories and the perception out there in Montana. How do we address that? Again, it comes back to certainty. What can we do with our state agencies? What kind of assistance can we get from our federal delegation and federal agencies to help provide that certainty? And the education of the consumer, and I mentioned that before. That's a really critical component. At the Montana Electric Cooperatives Association, we've tried through our Rural Montana magazine that goes to 330,000 Montanans every month. We try to educate as much as we can out there, but it's still an uphill battle on trying to help have Montanans understand that it's going to be okay if we have baseload generation in our state, particularly in some of the areas of western Montana where people are highly concerned about that. But That's what we're going to need to have, not just for economic development, but for energy security for all Montanans going forward. So I'm really excited that we had such a diverse group, and diverse opinions and experiences in that group, but we all really very quickly came together on identification of the problem and even some of the identification of some of the potential solutions going forward.
Ed, how about generation? What were some of the points covered there, and are there any themes that you're seeing in terms of the problem statement?
Yeah, I'll start with, I have participated on these kind of task force committees before, and I will tell you, I've seen examples where participants quickly start to advocate for whatever their individual company's self-interest is. I was really encouraged. That did not occur in the first two task force meetings that I participated in. Everybody came with an objective of what is in the best interest of the state of Montana. And I was really, really encouraged by that, because that's where we'll get some big, bold ideas that'll come out of this. On the generation side, I've spoke about it just a little bit. It was, you can't build a power generation plant unless you have transmission. You can't build a natural gas power generation plant unless you have natural gas. I think John hit on that points earlier. So this is a little bit of the chicken and the egg challenge that we have in our industry that's not unique to Montana. But listen, I'm encouraged by the discussions.
Great. And John, can you share a little bit, kind of Northwestern Energy's perspectives when we talk about problem statements and identifying barriers? What are you hoping to see come out of those discussions?
I think the most important thing is actionable items first. I mean, we don't want to have anything that comes out with recommendations that just sit on the shelf and then we think about, oh, that was a lost opportunity. So from what I've heard is that's not happening at this point in time. I do believe that we can't sit back and hope a lot of this stuff just occurs naturally. There's already organizations going out and advocating against this type of development, and they are very good at spreading their perspective. The mainstream media frequently picks it up and runs with it. So I would urge, to Mark's earlier point about education, I think we are already behind a little bit on the education piece. I look at this, especially the large load piece, I'm a glass half full kind of person, and I see nothing but advantages for the state of Montana from a growth perspective. Unless you don't want to have any new generation developed in the state. And it's not just thermal. You can firm up intermittent generation as well. Or if you want to close down existing thermal. Those are really the only two reasons I believe why you wouldn't want to have this kind of growth in Montana. There's strong advocacy already developing. There's strong advocacy in other states now against it. So we need to recognize that and be willing to step up and start advocating for a positive Montana future that has all of the above from a supply perspective. And anything that comes out of the task force that facilitates that, I really see it being a focal point for information. And it'd be interesting to see how you and the administration are able to be part of that.
Great, thank you. I'm going to open this one up to everyone, so whoever would like to start can. But where are you seeing innovation in energy supply and delivery and data center project development, whether that's from a standpoint of emerging generation technology or opportunities for efficiency and flexible loads?
Yeah, so I'll talk about on the demand side. One of the big trends is the density of the buildings. You used to need a lot of acreage to get a certain amount of compute in a location, but they've been able to get bigger and bigger computers, more and more computers in a smaller space, so basically it's rack density. And it used to be you'd have 50 kilowatts of computers in one rack. And now people are talking about introducing 1 megawatt of compute in a single rack. Now, these are heavy, but the density that they can put in these buildings is increasing over time. And it creates a challenge in that you've got a more denser building. Now that they've got an existing building, they're going to put more compute in that building. But they're starting to look at cooling is expensive. And there's ways to do that, so they're trying to come up with more efficient cooling technologies. They've seen the way that the load fluctuates inside the servers, where it's not every computer's on, so they're trying to find ways to have additional compute that can be switched on to balance that load out. And they're also looking at software that can help them better predict what the compute's going to be so that they can plan when their compute will be on. I think another innovation is around the backup power that's there. So every data center that gets built anticipates that the grid will go down 2 to 4 days of the year. And so they will always build backup generation to support that. Traditionally, there was not an openness for the data center owner to share that backup generation with the grid, even though it was there. So basically, you could have a 500 megawatt data center, and if the grid was challenged and there was an emergency notice put out by John Hines' company, they would anticipate that and they would be ready to be curtailed. They'd turn on their generation. The legislature, has fortunately stepped in and talked about it. The governor has the ability in an emergency situation to work with the data center customers to act as demand response. I think that's the big innovations are increasing density, the focus on becoming more cost efficient on cooling, becoming better at managing the compute inside the data center so that the demand is more flat, and then also the use of backup power to promote grid stability as a part of getting stakeholder support.
Does anybody else want to add on that, or Charles, should I turn it over for questions? Any questions?
Well, while Charles is going, I'd just like to add on to what John spoke to there. I don't see a lot of what I call step change is in technology, on conventional technologies. There's efficiency gains all the time. But I really do see a tremendous amount of potential benefit with the interchange of development of power, especially behind the meter, if you will, with data centers and the utility to maximize the value of that generation between our customers to export and also for the existing large load. So I think that will be a very, very fascinating development over the next 3-4 years.
Great, thank you. All right.
Corey Fong from MD Resources Group out of Bismarck, North Dakota. Our company in Montana includes Montana Dakota Utilities. We serve North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Wyoming, and Montana, of course, electric and gas. We also have WBI Energy that serves natural gas in essentially that same footprint. I just want to thank the governor and the chamber for convening this great conversation. Sonia and the governor for convening the task force. We also have a member on the task force on the transmission working group. My comment is really to amplify and reinforce some of the things that have been said by Mr. Hines and you, Ed, about some of the need for natural gas. We serve natural gas, obviously, or we have a pipeline company that would love to bring natural gas to eastern Montana, WBI. You mentioned all that flaring that's going on in the Bakken. We're on the brink, very close to announcing a 375-mile project from the Bakken all the way to Fargo, which would be transformational for North Dakota. We would love to bring that gas to eastern Montana, but one of the biggest barriers for Montana is the property tax policy. And that actually creates, the property tax, a material impact to that rate for bringing that gas. And so I would hope that this task force, and John actually amplified and talked about what it means for our utility customers that we pass those property taxes on. But what I really want to emphasize is the impact in terms of that infrastructure for natural gas. It is a material impact, and I think it's very important that the task force talks about the cost that the property tax is creating a barrier for energy development. And Montana is a tremendous place to do business. That's something that's obvious by this conversation, but that is something that is going to be a barrier for kind of fulfilling its energy future into the future. So again, thanks for the conversation. Thanks for bringing this forward, and would love to have more conversations about this.
Well, Charles, am I out of time, or is there time for one more question?
We can take one more. Matt's got it over there. Thank you.
Hi, Kyle Unruh here, speaking in my capacity as a board member at Montana Energy Business Alliance. We're a collection of large loads, IPPs, economic development orgs in the state. So happy to hear a lot of conversation in the panel about the importance of linear infrastructure. We're finding the same in our group. Just wanted to give the panel one more opportunity to talk about the challenges you see in developing both linear natural gas infrastructure, but also electric transmission infrastructure, what support you can use from the governor's office, the legislature, Montana Energy Business Alliance to enable development of that infrastructure, and what makes you confident that it will ultimately be built. Thanks.
You know what, I need to put a plug in for the Grid United North Plains Connector project before I get off stage here. There's a transmission project, 3,000 megawatts, connect the end of the coal strip transmission line to 2 electricity markets in the east. And it's a partnership of, I forget, it's 7 or 8 different utilities, ourselves included, that have an option in it. It's Grid United that's developing the project. I think it's that kind of commercial innovation that will allow some of this infrastructure to get built, and once again, off of the wholesale electricity market, as opposed to exclusively on the back of Montana ratepayers. There's several other transmission projects that are being contemplated in the state as well that would probably look at similar models, and so I think that's a big part of the solution.
Great. Well, thank you, and if everyone will join me in a round of applause for this outstanding panel. Thank you.